You told me to leave forever, I said. So I did. I sold the house, packed up 50 years of sacrifice, and disappeared. Not to punish you, but to finally remember who I was before I belonged to everyone else. I was 72, a widow, a mother, a grandmother. I had given them everything. My time, my home, my silence. And in return, they told me I was too much. 1 month later, after 23 missed calls and a bulldozer parked on their inheritance, they finally realized I was never the one who needed them. They were the ones who forgot who I was. Subscribe and share this story and your own experience in the comments. Your journey might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. Leave a comment telling us where you're watching from. It began, as these things often do, with something small. A birthday card and a pair of knitted socks. I had found them in a little shop near my cottage. Handmade, soft as clouds. Dyed the shade of blue my grandson Liam always chose when he colored. I added a card with a joke about dinosaurs and grandmas that made me laugh out loud in the store. It wasn't expensive. It wasn't extravagant. Just something I thought would make him smile. We were sitting around the table that Sunday afternoon, the air thick with the smell of Brielle's casserole and the faint tension that had become a regular guest at our family dinners. The twins were giggling in the next room, crashing wooden blocks into plastic towers. Nathan poured wine into stemless glasses, always just to the halfway mark, always a practice movement like he was pouring peace into the space between us. And then Brielle opened the gift. "Oh," she said, holding up the socks with pinched fingers. "These are cute." I smiled. "Aren't they? They're made from alpaca wool. I thought Liam would like the blue. Matches his superhero cape." "He has enough socks," she replied, setting them down with a polite smile that didn't touch her eyes. "And we already got him a card from us. It just sends mixed messages. Mixed messages. Over a birthday card." Nathan stayed silent, of course. That had become his new role. The buffer, the peacemaker, the man who avoided picking sides by pretending there weren't any sides to begin with. I took a sip of my wine to steady my hand. "It's just a little something." I wasn't trying to overstep. Brielle placed the card back in the envelope, folded the flap, and tapped it twice on the table like she was sealing a verdict. "You always say that, Irene," she said, her tone measured. "But it's never just a little something. It's the socks or the surprise visits, or the snacks you bring even when I ask you not to. It's always something. Something in me. A brittle place I had plastered over for years. Cracked. I didn't realize I needed permission to bring my grandson a birthday card," I replied softly, the words thick in my throat. Brielle's eyes met mine then, sharp and bright with something I couldn't quite name. Frustration, resentment, maybe even fear. "We're trying to create boundaries," she said. "Healthy ones. You don't seem to understand that." I turned to Nathan, searching his face for support, for a sign that he still remembered the woman who stayed up with him through every fever, who walked to 3 jobs so he could go to college without debt, who stitched every Halloween costume by hand. He looked tired. "I think Brielle's right," he said, not unkindly. "You mean well, Mom. I know that. But sometimes it feels like you're not letting us parent our own way." I stared at him, at the man I'd raised, and for the first time I saw not just his father's nose or my stubborn jaw, but a stranger who looked at me like a guest overstaying her welcome. "I come once a week," I whispered. "Once, and I ask before I bring anything." Nathan exhaled, ran a hand through his hair. "I know. But even then, it's a lot." Brielle stood up, the chair scraping back with a screech. She crossed her arms, eyes glassy now with emotion that had been waiting too long to surface. "You always find a way to make us feel like we're failing," she said. "You don't mean to, I'm sure. But your advice, your little suggestions, they're not helpful. They're suffocating. Why don't you just—" She caught herself, but not soon enough. "Why don't you just leave forever?" The words didn't echo in the room. They landed, heavy, final. Nathan's lips parted like he might intervene. I waited. I waited the way I had always waited, for him to defend me, to speak up, to see me, but he didn't. "We'd be better off without all the drama," he said quietly. There it was. A sentence so casually spoken it could have been mistaken for a line from a television show. But it wasn't. It was real. It was mine. It was theirs. I nodded once. No tears, no dramatic speeches, just a cold, deliberate sort of clarity. I stood. My chair made no sound. I didn't reach for the socks or the card. I didn't say goodbye to the children. "I see," I said, and I left. I walked past the family photos that no longer featured me, past the artwork pinned to the fridge, none of which I'd seen before today. I stepped outside into the late afternoon sun, its warmth entirely disconnected from the chill inside me. As I pulled out of their driveway, my hands didn't shake. Not yet. The world was sharp and quiet, the way it gets after a snowfall or a funeral. I didn't cry. I wouldn't. Not yet. But something had ended. Something long held together by effort and memory and obligation. It had finally unraveled. And the unraveling was silent. The road home had never felt so long. I drove in silence, not even the radio to fill the space. The air in the car felt thick with everything left unsaid. I took the scenic route, part habit, part hesitation. A right turn past the library where Nathan used to sit cross-legged during story hour. A detour past the park where he learned to ride his bike and scraped his knee so badly he wouldn't let go of my hand for 3 days. Each street carried some ghost of our lives. And today, every memory stung like vinegar on a fresh wound. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the sun was sinking behind the tall oaks that framed the cottage. It had always been a comforting sight. This house with its peeling white trim, ivy curling up the porch posts, the screen door that creaked in protest no matter how much oil I gave the hinges. It wasn't big, it wasn't modern, but it was mine. And it had been ours once, mine and Nathan's. I parked and sat for a long moment, gripping the wheel. The house loomed quiet and familiar, yet tonight it felt like a museum, a place that held what was, but no longer what is. When I finally stepped inside, the scent of old wood and lavender oil greeted me, just as it always had. My slippers by the door, my shawl on the hook. The small comforts of a life that had long been rooted in routine. But now the air felt thinner, like something essential had slipped through the walls while I was gone. I walked through the hallway, my fingers brushing the faded wallpaper, the old thermostat with its yellowed dial, the family photographs that lined the corridor like a silent parade of the past. There was Nathan at 5, gap-toothed and beaming in his Superman costume. Nathan at 12, awkward and lanky, holding a model rocket we'd built together for the science fair. Nathan at 17 in his graduation gown, his arms slung around my shoulders, pride radiating from both of us. And there was the photo I always paused at, Nathan asleep on his father's chest, both of them curled up on the worn plaid couch, a newspaper sliding off James's lap. James. Even after 30 years, I still said his name like it could summon something. Warmth, reassurance, perhaps just a fragment of the steadiness I'd lost the day he died. It was this house that had held us together after his passing, this house that became both sanctuary and battlefield as I raised our son alone. Every wall carried echoes of struggle and sacrifice, of whispered lullabies and shouted arguments, of first steps and slammed doors. I wandered into the kitchen. The kettle was still on the stove from the morning. I turned it on out of habit, though I didn't want tea. I didn't want anything. The table stood set for one, as it had for years. I pulled out a chair but didn't sit. I couldn't. Instead, I wandered from room to room like a guest, a stranger surveying someone else's life. The living room with its sagging armchair where I'd nursed colds and heartbreaks. The mantel still held James's photo, a small porcelain angel beside it. Nathan had given it to me when he was 7, insisting it looked like Daddy. I picked it up now, its wings chipped, the paint flaking. Had Nathan remembered that gift? Would he even recognize it? Or had that boy been lost somewhere between teenage silences and adult obligations? I climbed the stairs slowly, each creak of the wood echoing like a metronome counting down an invisible clock. At the end of the hallway was Nathan's old bedroom. I hadn't changed it much. The bed was still twin-sized, the comforter faded with tiny stars. The bookshelves still held dusty copies of Where the Red Fern Grows and The Hobbit. His baseball glove rested on the windowsill, perfectly shaped to his 8-year-old hand. I sat on the edge of the bed and let my fingers trace the stitching. How many hours had I waited at ball fields, cheering in sun and sleet, just to see that glove catch one pop fly? The tears came then, quietly. No sobs, no theatrics. Just a steady, silent stream down my cheeks, dropping onto the glove, soaking into the leather like regret. This house, this life, it had all been built on the assumption that love was enough, that presence, consistency, sacrifice would be seen, remembered, cherished. But now all I could feel was emptiness. Not just in the rooms, but in the space between what I gave and what they saw. Back downstairs, I opened the drawer beneath the hutch. Inside were Nathan's school drawings, stick figures with triangle dresses, sunshines with too many rays, a Mother's Day card in purple crayon. "You are my hero. Love, Nate." I held it to my chest. I was someone's hero once. The kettle shrieked behind me. I turned it off and left the tea untouched. Later that night, I lay in bed with the lamp on, afraid of the dark and what it might confirm. I stared at the ceiling and tried to count all the ways I had given my life to my family. How I'd never taken a real vacation because Nathan needed braces. How I'd sold my mother's jewelry to help him with his down payment. How I'd rearranged my entire retirement to be near them, to help, to support, to stay close. And how none of it had been enough to shield me from being called suffocating, unwanted, excess. I turned off the light and closed my eyes. But I didn't sleep. Not really. I just lay there in the quiet of a house that had once been filled with laughter, filled with life, filled with purpose. Now it was filled with echoes. And for the first time in a long, long while, I let myself ask a dangerous question. If no one sees you anymore, are you still there? It started with a drawer, not the kind of drawer you open every day, the one in the hall where I kept flashlights and extension cords just in case. No, this was the drawer in the guest room dresser, the one I hadn't touched in years. I was looking for a photograph, something to distract myself from the stillness. I told myself it would be comforting to flip through albums, to revisit the past that had once felt so whole. But instead, my hand paused on the faded manila folder tucked beneath a bundle of old greeting cards and a yellowed church bulletin. The folder was heavier than I remembered. I carried it to the kitchen table, the one place in the house that had always made decisions feel manageable. I'd balanced checkbooks here, written grocery lists, filled out school forms, planned funeral flowers. If anything required quiet fortitude, this was where I did it. The folder creaked open like a door. Inside, copies of my will, the deed to the house, investment papers, a letter from Mr. Ashford, my lawyer, dated nearly 15 years ago, congratulating me on finally setting things in order. The will named Nathan as my sole heir. The house, the savings, the antiques, the entire estate, all of it. My hands were steady as I read the lines, as though this, somehow, was the final confirmation I had needed. Of course they were counting on the house. Of course they were planning around it. Why wouldn't they? I had never suggested otherwise. I had handed my future over to them with a bow on top, assuming, hoping that love would be the return on investment. But now, with the house echoing every corner of my sacrifice, I saw it differently. Was I mother, or was I property? Was I the woman who tucked Nathan into bed after nightmares, or just the deed holder of a piece of land he was silently waiting to inherit? And Brielle, was her resentment born of something deeper than mismatched socks and uninvited casseroles? Had she resented me all along for hovering, for being present, for quietly reminding her that her family had roots before her? My gaze drifted to the window. Outside, the bird bath was still half frozen from last week's frost. A squirrel darted across the fence. Life, in its indifferent persistence, went on. But inside me, something was shifting. There was no dramatic epiphany, no lightning strike or burst of clarity. Just a slow, steady question that surfaced like a forgotten melody. What if this is not the end of something, but the beginning? The thought startled me. At 72, I had stopped believing in beginnings. My life had been chapters closed: widow, empty nester, dutiful grandmother. I had grieved the what could have been for so long that I'd mistaken endurance for living. But maybe, I thought, fingers resting on the will, maybe it wasn't too late to begin again. Not for them. For me. What did I want? It was a question I hadn't dared to ask in years. Decades even. I had lived so long on the edges of others' needs that I hadn't charted my own center. Every plan I made, every dollar I saved, every dish I cooked or diaper I changed, it all orbited around someone else's gravity. I had been kind, I had been useful, I had been available, but I had not been seen. I looked back down at the will. My name at the top, clear and definitive, Irene May Thatcher. And suddenly it struck me. This house, this life, this legacy, it was mine, not theirs to inherit by default, not some inevitable passing of property like an old casserole dish handed down at Thanksgiving. Mine. For the first time in my life, I considered that my existence did not have to be filtered through the roles of mother or in-law or grandmother. It could simply be mine. I could make choices that weren't about stability or sacrifice. I could say no without guilt. I could say yes to something just because it made me feel alive. I stood, my spine aching from sitting too long, and carried the folder to the desk in the front room. There, next to the landline I still kept for emergency calls and old habits, sat my address book. I flipped to the A tab and ran my finger down until I found it. Mr. Harold Ashford, attorney at law. I picked up the phone and dialed. His voice was warm as ever. Mrs. Thatcher. It's been some time. Yes, I said. And for the first time in days, I smiled. It has. And I think it's time we talk. It was a Tuesday morning, still early, the air outside wet with dew and faint bird song, when I stood on the steps of Ashford and Bloom, my old lawyer's office in town. I hadn't been there in years, probably since I updated Nathan's college fund back when he was 20. The building was the same, though. Red brick, ivy curling up the side, the door sticking just slightly as it always had. It felt like stepping into an old version of myself, one I hadn't spoken to in decades. Mrs. Thatcher. Mr. Ashford looked up from behind a stack of neatly arranged files, his glasses perched low on his nose. He stood to greet me with both hands extended. You haven't aged a day. I chuckled softly. You're kind, Harold. And a liar. He waved me in with the warm familiarity of someone who had once known your spouse, your finances, and your worst fears. He motioned to the chair across from him. It still had the same faint coffee stain on the arm from that tense meeting after James died. What brings you in? He asked as I sat. I want to make changes, I said, setting the folder down on his desk. To my will. And to the house. He adjusted his glasses and leaned forward. What kind of changes? I want to remove Nathan as the primary heir, I said, as clearly and calmly as if I were ordering wallpaper samples. I want to leave trust funds for the grandchildren instead. Irrevocable. Accessible when they turn 18. Mr. Ashford raised a brow but didn't interrupt. And I want to list the house for sale, I added. Immediately. Cash buyer, fast close, no mention to family. The silence that followed wasn't judgmental, just quiet, respectful. I'm assuming something happened? He asked gently. I nodded. But I'm not here to relive it. I'm here to act on it. He pressed his lips together and gave a single nod. All right. You understand this is significant. The house, your cottage, it's an asset with emotional weight. You've always been firm about keeping it in the family. I met his gaze without blinking. Things change. People change. And I finally realized something, Harold. I paused, letting the weight of the thought settle in my chest before releasing it. I've been preserving this place for people who don't see me anymore, who stopped seeing me a long time ago. He didn't respond immediately. He just flipped open the folder, clicked his pen, and began making notes. We spent the next hour reviewing every line of the current will. The details were methodical and in some ways numbing. Asset allocation, legal phrasing, tax efficiency. But beneath all of that was something else. A pulse, a new rhythm, power, my power. It was a quiet rebellion, but rebellion nonetheless. The Irene who had once folded herself into her family's every request, who had measured her worth by her usefulness, was now deciding to cut the string. Not out of anger, not even bitterness, but clarity. She had loved with her whole being, and now she would love herself enough to begin again. Mr. Ashford called his realtor contact, a woman named Dana with a voice like silk and a mind like steel. We arranged to meet the next day. Before I left, Harold asked, "Do you want to tell Nathan before we proceed?" "No," I replied, standing. "They told me to leave. I'm just following instructions." He nodded. "Then let's make sure it's done right." That evening, I returned to the cottage and looked at it with new eyes. No longer a mausoleum of sacrifice, but a structure I had built and kept and poured myself into. It was mine. Every nail and floorboard, every paint chip and creaking stair, and soon it would belong to someone else. I went into the guest room, the same one where I'd found the will, and opened the closet. There were boxes in there that hadn't been touched in decades. Letters, baby clothes, wedding invitations, James's sweaters. I opened one and held it to my face, trying to catch even a trace of him. But his scent was long gone. Still, I folded it gently and placed it into the donation pile. There would be a lot of those in the days to come. The next day, Dana arrived in a beige coat and ankle boots, her clipboard and tablet in hand. She moved through the house briskly, taking notes, complimenting the crown molding and the original floorboards. "Lovely bones," she said. "A bit of work, but a gem for the right buyer." I stood near the fireplace, arms crossed. "I'm looking for a buyer who pays cash. Quick close. No renovations needed from me. I want to be out in 3 weeks." Her eyebrows lifted slightly. 3 weeks is tight, but doable, especially for a property like this. "You sure about the no family clause?" "Very sure," I said. "They don't know, and I'd like to keep it that way until it's done." She looked at me a moment longer than necessary, then smiled. "Understood." That evening, I opened a bottle of wine I had been saving for something. I wasn't even sure what anymore, and poured myself a glass. I sat at the dining table with the listing documents in front of me, unsigned. I traced the edge of the page with my finger. "Do you want this, Irene?" I asked aloud. Not in the way that people ask rhetorical questions to feel reassured, but the way one asks before taking a leap. The answer came not in words, but in sensation. A breath I hadn't realized I was holding released itself. A weight shifted. A lightness crept in. "Yes," I whispered. "Yes, I do." And I signed. I began with the pantry. Not because it mattered most, but because it mattered least. And when you're preparing to leave behind a life, it helps to start with the ordinary. Cans of chickpeas, half-used spices, jars of honey crystallized with age. I opened the first cabinet and stared at the rows of items I had purchased, cooked with, stocked up on for other people's preferences. I held each one for a second longer than I needed to. Then I made 3 piles. Keep, donate, discard. Keep was the smallest. I wasn't just packing. I was deciding what deserved to come with me into this next life, not based on usefulness, but joy. That was the rule I made for myself. If it didn't carry joy, it didn't get to come. The following morning, I opened the cedar chest in the living room. It was the one James's mother had given us as a wedding gift. Inside were the heirlooms I had been curating for years: lace doilies, hand-embroidered napkins, silver-plated cutlery I'd only taken out on holidays. For whom had I preserved these? I sat cross-legged on the floor and ran my hand across a white linen table runner, stained faintly with red wine from a Christmas decades ago. I remembered the way James had laughed that night, his laugh, real and loud and unashamed. Nathan was 6, wearing a reindeer hat, falling asleep with mashed potatoes on his face. That memory I kept. The table runner I folded gently into a donation bag. There were dozens of such decisions, Quiet, private farewells to pieces of a life that had already passed. The wooden cradle James built by hand. The books I used to read Nathan at bedtime. The pressed corsage from my high school prom, brittle and brown. I created a ritual out of it. Tea in the morning, music low, sun through the curtains, and one drawer at a time. Each object asked me a question. Does this still belong to you? And I answered with my hands. Some things I wrapped with reverence. My wedding album, James's pocket watch, Nathan's baby book, the drawings he had made of me with crayon halos and superhero capes, the letters James had written during his long hospital stay, pages of love and pain and hope. Those came with me. The rest, I let go. I took 6 trips to the donation center. Each time I handed off boxes, I felt a strange mix of relief and grief, as if I were scattering ashes. The volunteers smiled politely, not knowing that they were taking in fragments of a woman who was day by day unburdening her soul. And then came the bedrooms. I had saved them for last. The master bedroom was first. The bed James and I once shared had long since been replaced with something firmer, more practical. But the closet still held his sweaters, neatly hung, their shoulders slowly collapsing from decades of waiting. I pressed one to my chest. No scent left, no warmth, just the ghost of love. I'm sorry, I whispered, but it's time. I folded them gently, one by one. In Nathan's old room, I found a shoebox filled with his childhood treasures. Trading cards, marbles, a plastic sheriff's badge he wore for 2 straight summers. I sat on the bed, cradling the box in my lap, my fingers brushing across the objects like relics from a lost civilization. I kept the sheriff's badge. Everything else went back in the box. For Nathan, if he ever asked for it. The real estate agent called with updates every few days. Multiple offers, mostly developers. One particularly aggressive buyer wanted to demolish and rebuild. Dana hesitated before telling me, worried it might upset me. But it didn't. Let them tear it down, I said. Let it become something new. I meant it. This house had served its purpose. It had given me shelter. It had held my grief. It had raised my son. But it was no longer my home. It was a mausoleum of sacrifice, and I was done worshiping at the altar of what used to be. The sale closed on a Wednesday. I signed the final documents at Ashford's office with a calm hand and a clear mind. The check was wired directly to my account. Dana handed me a slim envelope, final keys returned, and shook my hand. Congratulations, she said, her smile genuine. What's next? A small apartment near the beach, I said. 2 hours south, clean lines, no ghosts. She laughed, but I wasn't joking. I returned to the cottage one last time, not to live, but to say goodbye. I walked from room to room, not rushing. I touched the windowsills James had painted. I ran my fingers along the pencil lines marking Nathan's height on the pantry door. I stood in the dining room and saw every Thanksgiving, every birthday, every moment when I believed love and effort would be enough to hold a family together. And then I stood in the entryway, my suitcase by the door. The air felt still, not heavy, but reverent. Like the house knew. I loved you, I said aloud, but I'm not yours anymore. I closed the door behind me. I didn't look back. It was exactly 1 month to the day. I remember because I had just finished hanging the last of the curtains in my new apartment. A soft cream fabric with pale blue stitching that caught the morning light like water. The place still smelled of fresh paint and cardboard, and the floors gleamed with a kind of promise the old house had long forgotten. There was no grandfather clock here, no room full of unused china, no closet filled with someone else's sweaters. Just 2 bedrooms, a small kitchen with modern appliances, and a balcony that overlooked the edge of the sea. I had made a life here, quiet, uncluttered, and finally truly mine. I had just sat down with a cup of tea when it happened. My phone lit up, then again and again. A slow blink turned into a storm. 1 missed call, then 3, then 8. I stared at the screen. Nathan. The name appeared, disappeared, then reappeared. 13, 15, 18. I hadn't heard from him or Brielle in 31 days. Not a single text, not a call, not even a forwarded photo of the twins. The silence had become its own rhythm, a part of the healing, or so I had told myself. But now, my screen looked like it was under siege. 23 missed calls. And then the voicemails started to appear, one after another. I hesitated before listening. It wasn't fear. It was caution. I had worked so hard to build this peace inside me, plank by plank, like a boat meant to carry me far from their judgment, their cold silences, their dismissive sighs. I didn't want to be dragged back into the undertow, but eventually I pressed play. Nathan's voice crackled through the speaker, breathless and high-strung. "Mom, call me back. Please, right away. Next message. It's about the house. We just call me." Then Brielle's voice sharper. "Helen, we need to talk. What's going on? Mrs. Halloway said there's construction happening? That can't be right. Please, what did you do?" I set the phone down. Construction, so they knew. Or more accurately, someone had told them. Probably Mrs. Halloway from next door, bless her nosy little heart. I could picture her peering through her lace curtains, spotting the bulldozer parked on the lawn, and immediately dialing Brielle with the urgency of a tornado siren. I stood and walked to the balcony. The ocean was loud today, crashing against the rocks like it had something to prove. I let the salt air fill my lungs and the sun warm my face. Let them panic. Let them scramble. Let them feel, if only for a moment, what it was like to lose something they had assumed was permanent. Because that's what they had done to me, without a second thought. They'd assumed I would always be there. Quiet, helpful, obedient. They had counted on my reliability the same way you count on the porch light turning on at dusk. They had never imagined I might stop shining. My phone rang again. The screen blinked with Nathan's name. I let it ring. I wasn't ready to speak yet. Not because I was afraid of confrontation, but because I was finally beginning to understand the power of silence. Let them wonder. Let them feel the space I used to fill. Let them try to navigate their lives without the invisible scaffolding I had been providing all along. I watched the waves for a long time, sipping lukewarm tea, listening to gulls cry overhead. By the time the phone stopped ringing, the sun had begun to set. The peace I had built, the quiet I had claimed, didn't break beneath their calls. It held, and so did I. They insisted we meet the next day. "Coffee shop or somewhere neutral," Nathan had said on the final voicemail. "We just need to talk, Mom, please." I chose a cafe near the marina, public, quiet, open air. Not the sort of place where voices could be raised without attracting attention. And certainly not my home, not anymore. I wasn't inviting them into my sanctuary. I arrived 10 minutes early and ordered a black coffee. No sugar, no milk, just the truth, hot and bitter. They were already seated when I turned the corner of the patio, their faces tight with unease. Nathan stood awkwardly as I approached, while Brielle offered a polite but shallow smile, the kind you give someone you're not sure how to greet anymore. "You look different," Nathan said as I sat down. I did. Shorter hair now, lighter. A linen blouse in sea glass green and sandals that still carried a trace of sand. I had started wearing colors I never wore before, tones I used to think were too bold for someone my age. But I wasn't shrinking anymore. "I am different," I replied evenly. Or maybe I've just remembered who I was before I started living entirely for other people. They exchanged glances. Brielle looked like she was rehearsing something in her head. Nathan ran a hand over his jaw, the way he used to when he was about to confess something he knew would upset me. "Mom," he began, "we went by the house." I nodded. "I assumed you would. There's construction equipment on the lawn," Brielle said. "A crew tearing up the front path." "That would be the new owners," I said calmly. "I hear they're building something more modern." Brielle's lips parted. "You sold the house?" "Yes. To strangers?" "To buyers," I said. "Cash. Fast close. Just as I instructed." Nathan leaned forward, his voice low and tense. "You can't just sell the house, Mom. That was—" "What?" I interrupted softly. "Your inheritance?" He looked away. "Your safety net?" I continued. "The foundation of your retirement plan? The college fund for the twins? That house was part of our future, Brielle snapped. No, I said, still calm. It was my past. They stared at me as though I'd spoken in a foreign tongue. In a way, I had. I was no longer fluent in the language of self-erasure. I lived in that house for 50 years, I said. I built a life there. I raised a child there. I buried a husband there. I held that place together with love and memory and bone-deep labor. And yet, not one of you asked me how I was managing alone. Not one of you asked me what I wanted. Nathan's voice cracked. It's just, why didn't you tell us? I tilted my head slightly. Would it have changed anything? Would you have come back to check on me? Would Brielle have welcomed me into your home with warmth instead of obligation? That's not fair, she said. No, I replied. It's not, and it hasn't been for a long time. They both sat back, silent. Do you remember what you said to me? I asked, looking at Nathan. That afternoon, when I came to dinner? His mouth opened, then closed again. His gaze dropped to the table. You said you'd be better off without me, and Brielle told me to leave forever. Brielle rubbed her forehead. We were angry. So was I said, but I didn't lash out. I left. I took your advice. I stepped out of your way. I disappeared. Nathan's voice was small now. We didn't mean it. You didn't stop it, I said. And now you're shocked that I listened. The waiter approached, placing a muffin in the center of the table. No one touched it. Nathan cleared his throat. I just wish you'd said something before making such a big decision. I've made plenty of decisions for this family, I said. Many of them quietly, many of them painful. This one was just, finally, mine. Brielle looked up. Her tone had shifted, less defensive now, more searching. So what now? I looked out toward the water where a sailboat drifted lazily, catching the wind. Now, I said, you learn to live without assuming I'll always be there to carry the emotional weight for you. Nathan's expression folded with pain. Does that mean you're cutting us out? No, I said gently. It means I'm stepping back. You don't lose me. But you do lose the version of me that never asked for anything in return. We sat in silence, all three of us. The kind of silence that isn't empty but full, of hurt, recognition, and something unspoken that might just become understanding. Then I reached into my bag and pulled out a set of documents. These are for the twins, I said. Trusts set up in their names. Accessible when they're 18. No conditions. No strings. Brielle looked stunned. You still did that? Of course, I said. They're children. They didn't wound me. You did. Nathan's eyes welled slightly, but he didn't speak. I'm not punishing you, I said. I'm protecting myself. Brielle spoke next, her voice low. What do you want from us? Respect, I said. Not convenience, not guilt. Respect. And a relationship on equal ground, not built on assumption or obligation. And the house? Nathan asked, almost wistfully. The house is gone, I replied. Let it go. There was nothing left to argue. We parted with no promises, no hugs, just a long glance from my son that felt heavier than any embrace. But I didn't feel shattered. I felt whole. We agreed to meet again 2 days later. Nathan suggested the park near their home, neutral ground, he said. I agreed, but only on the condition that it be early in the morning, before the crowds, before the noise, before anyone could pretend they were too busy to really talk. The benches were still wet with dew when I arrived, the grass whispering beneath my feet as I walked toward the shaded grove near the pond. Ducks skimmed the surface like they had somewhere to be, and the air smelled faintly of cut grass and old trees. Nathan and Brielle were already waiting. They stood when they saw me, more cautious this time, more careful with their eyes. Something had shifted since the cafe. Whether it was guilt or clarity, I didn't know. But they were softer, less defensive. I sat first. They followed. We didn't speak for a while, just sat there. 3 people linked by blood and history and 1,000 tangled moments. Some beautiful, some painful, some never acknowledged. Brielle was the first to break the silence. I need to say something, she said quietly, folding her hands in her lap. And I want you to let me finish. I nodded. She took a breath. I've felt judged by you from the very beginning, even when you were smiling. even when you said nothing at all. It felt like I was being measured against someone I couldn't compete with. I tilted my head slightly. James? She nodded. Nathan's father. You never said it outright, but I always felt like I was falling short of some gold standard I couldn't see. Like no matter what I did, you had already decided I wasn't enough. I didn't answer right away. Not because I disagreed, but because the words stung with familiarity. There had been women in my own past, my mother-in-law, my sister-in-law, whose silences had once made me feel the same way. I had promised myself I'd never do that to another woman. And yet, I'm sorry, I said. I never meant to make you feel that way. I really didn't, but that doesn't mean you're wrong. Brielle blinked. Clearly, she hadn't expected agreement. You reminded me of who I used to be, I continued. Young, capable, building something with the person you love. I think maybe I resented you for having what I lost. And instead of dealing with that grief, I tried to stay involved in Nathan's life any way I could, even when it wasn't welcome. She looked down, her fingers twisting in her lap. I never hated you. I just didn't know how to have you in our lives without feeling like a failure. I sighed. And I didn't know how to be in your lives without being needed. The honesty hung between us. Not sharp, not bitter, just true. Nathan spoke next. I never meant to hurt you, Mom, but I need you to understand something too. When you were always there, hovering, helping, suggesting, I stopped feeling like an adult. Like I couldn't make a decision without disappointing you. I thought I was being helpful, I said. I know, he said. And maybe I let you do too much for too long. Maybe I leaned on you more than I should have, and then resented you for it. That wasn't fair either. We were quiet again, the kind of silence that doesn't beg to be filled. I looked at both of them, really looked. Nathan's hair graying at the temples, Brielle's hands weathered by housework and motherhood. They weren't villains, just flawed people trying to make a life, just like I had once done. And in our fumbling efforts, we had all managed to wound each other. But when you said those words, I finally whispered, when you told me to leave forever, and Nathan said you'd be better off without me. Nathan lowered his head. I know, he said. I hear it in my sleep now. Brielle nodded. We said it in anger, but you heard it as truth, and you acted on it. I met her gaze, because it felt like truth. She inhaled sharply, then exhaled. We failed you. And I failed myself, I replied, for letting it go on for so long, for never asking for more, for always making myself small in the name of being easy to love. Nathan shifted beside her. Is it too late to fix it? No, I said. But it's too late to undo what's been done. Brielle's voice was fragile. And what does that mean? It means we start fresh, on new terms. It means I won't be the woman who rearranges your pantry when you're gone or brings over casseroles unless invited. It means I will not be on call for babysitting, holidays, or moral support just because it's convenient. Nathan's jaw tightened, not in anger but in reckoning. And it means, I continued, that I am not just a grandmother, not just a mother, not just a woman who lived quietly in a house you thought you'd inherit. I am a person with dreams, with wounds, with agency. I see that now, he said. I wish I'd seen it sooner. I do too, I replied. But here we are. Brielle wiped at her eyes. Do you still love us? Of course I do, I said. But love without respect is just duty, and I'm done living by duty. Nathan nodded. So where do we go from here? I didn't answer right away. Instead, I looked up, at the trees overhead, at the light coming through them, at the way the wind whispered through the leaves, and then I smiled softly but fully. Forward, I said. We go forward. The next time we met, it was on my turf. I invited them to my apartment, not for reconciliation, not for tea and pleasantries, but for clarity. It had been a week since our conversation in the park, since truths were laid bare and the wounds between us acknowledged, if not fully healed. But honesty without action is just performance. And I wasn't interested in performance anymore. So, on a quiet Saturday morning, I set 2 extra chairs at my small balcony table and brewed a pot of coffee, not out of habit, but out of choice. Nathan and Brielle arrived right on time, the twins left behind with a neighbor. I could see the hesitation in their movements as they stepped into the space. My space. A place that didn't carry the scent of Sunday roasts or shelves of their childhood trophies. This home was airy, open, quiet. The kind of quiet that isn't lonely, but peaceful. "It's beautiful," Brielle said as she looked around. Nathan gave a half smile. "Doesn't look anything like the cottage?" "No," I said. That was the point. We sat. There was no idle chit-chat, no small talk. I didn't offer cookies or distractions. I began with what needed to be said. "I love the twins," I said, "and I still want a relationship with them. But it will be on my terms now." Nathan nodded slowly. "Of course. I won't be available for drop-ins. If you want me to babysit, you'll ask. Formally, in advance. Not as an afterthought or a backup plan." Brielle opened her mouth to respond, but stopped herself. "I will not cancel plans to accommodate you," I continued. "I won't rearrange my life around your crises. I spent decades doing that, and I don't regret the love I gave, but I do regret never asking for any in return." They both looked stricken, but they didn't interrupt. "I'll attend birthday parties and school plays if I'm invited, but I will no longer assume I belong where I'm not explicitly wanted." Nathan looked up then, eyes misted but steady. "You always belonged. We just didn't know how to show it." "That's your work to do," I said gently, "not mine." Brielle shifted in her seat. "So where does that leave us?" "In a new place," I replied. "One where I'm not just your convenience or your legacy. I'm your equal. A person with boundaries, preferences, and a life that doesn't revolve around yours." There was a long silence. Then Nathan leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I want to be better," he said. "We both do. But I'm scared we've damaged this beyond repair." "You haven't," I said. "But there are consequences. The house is gone. That chapter is closed. The woman who stayed quiet to keep the peace, she's gone too." Brielle let out a slow breath. "And the new woman?" I smiled, not out of spite, but with the soft pride of someone who had finally come home to herself. "She's learning how to live." I reached across the table and handed them each an envelope. Inside were schedules, not just mine, but the Children's Trust documentation, upcoming travel plans, and a simple note: call before visiting, respect the calendar, and above all, no assumptions. Nathan looked at it as if it were a map to a place he wasn't sure how to reach. Brielle folded hers carefully and tucked it into her purse. "We want to get it right," she said quietly. "Eventually." "That's up to you," I replied. "But I won't build my life waiting." They stayed for another 20 minutes, asking about the ocean view, the local bookstore, the beach yoga class I'd joined. They were tentative, like tourists in a new country. A little awkward, a little lost, but trying. And trying mattered now, more than apologizing. When they left, I walked them to the door. Nathan hesitated before stepping out. "You're not disappearing again, are you?" I rested a hand lightly on his arm. "I'm not disappearing," I said. "I'm reappearing as myself." He nodded, eyes bright. "I see that now." I watched them walk down the hall, hand in hand, and then I turned back toward the sea-colored light spilling through my living room windows, my heart both lighter and fuller. The lines had been redrawn, not in anger, not in punishment, but in truth. And this time, they were mine. The morning I booked my flight to New Zealand, I didn't hesitate. Not out of defiance, not to prove a point, not even as a way to escape what had happened, but because I wanted it. Plain and simple, just wanted it. It had been a dream James and I shared in our early years. We'd circled it in brochures, traced our fingers along maps, made imaginary itineraries between diaper changes and late-night grading sessions. But the dream was always tucked away, postponed for Nathan's needs, then for money, then for time, then for grief. Now there were no excuses left. Just a 72-year-old woman, a window seat, and a heart finally light enough to carry. I packed a single suitcase, comfortable walking shoes, a guidebook with notes scribbled in the margins, a small album of photos, Nathan as a boy, the twins on the beach, James smiling under a maple tree. not to anchor me, but to remind me of what I had built and what I had let go. Before I left, I mailed 2 postcards from the airport, one to Emma and Liam. I'm going to see real glowworms and volcanoes. Save me a spot at your next tea party. Love, Grandma. And one to Nathan and Brielle. Off to chase the sun. Don't worry, I'll be back, just not to the place you left me. The flight was long, but I wasn't restless. I watched the clouds roll past and thought of how far I'd come. Not just the miles behind me, but the years I had traveled inside myself, through silence, service, resentment, invisibility. All of it had brought me here, to this new place, this new dawn. The moment I stepped out of the plane and into the clean, crisp air of a New Zealand morning, I felt it. I was no longer waiting, not for forgiveness, not for recognition, not for someone to make space for me at the table. I was the table now. I filled my days with hikes along green cliffs, ferry rides through fjords, stories told by strangers who became friends over shared dinners and foreign wines. I took photos, not for Instagram, not to prove anything, but for myself. Little captures of joy and awe and rediscovered wonder. I sent postcards every week. To the twins, I described dolphins and stargazing, and the joy of getting caught in a rainstorm without caring about wet shoes. I signed each one with stickers and stamps and inside jokes only we shared. To Nathan and Brielle, I kept it simple. Updates, moments, gratitude. And slowly, their messages came too. Tentative at first, then warmer. Photos of the twins building a cardboard boat in the backyard, a selfie of Brielle holding a paintbrush, caption trying something new. A voice note from Nathan, "Miss you. The kids want to know when you'll be back." When I returned home, a phrase that no longer meant the cottage on Maple Street but my sunlit apartment by the sea, I found a package waiting on my doorstep. Inside, a framed drawing by Emma of me standing next to a volcano. A tiny glittery sun in the corner and the words "Grandma the Brave" in crooked handwriting. I hung it above my writing desk, because that's who I had become. Not Grandma the Available, not Mom the Selfless, but Irene the Brave. A woman who once gave everything and then, when the giving hollowed her out, dared to choose herself. Sunday dinners resumed, but on rotation. Sometimes at my place, sometimes at theirs, sometimes not at all, and that was okay. I babysat once a week because I wanted to, not because I was expected to. I offered advice only when asked, and the space between us became honest, not performative. Tense sometimes. Yes, but real. One morning over pancakes with the twins, Liam asked, "Grandma, where are you going next?" I looked out toward the ocean. "Maybe Italy," I said. "Or Alaska. Or somewhere I haven't even thought of yet. Can we come?" I smiled. "Someday. But not all adventures are shared." Later that week, Brielle called. "I signed up for a watercolor class," she said. "It's been years. I'm glad," I told her. And I meant it. Even she, I realized, had started to unspool herself from expectation. Even she was learning to reappear. Now, every morning begins with light. I wake to the sound of waves, stretch with gratitude instead of dread, and drink my coffee slowly. Not because I have nowhere to be, but because I have finally arrived where I was always meant to be. Whole, unapologetic, seen. I keep one photo on my bedside table. It's of me, in front of the cottage, taken in my 30s. I'm holding Nathan on my hip, smiling in a way that says I'm trying my best. I look at that woman now and whisper, "We made it." She built the bridge. I crossed it. And on the other side, I found not just peace, but possibility. Because no matter how late it feels, no matter how much you've given away, there is always time to return to yourself, even if you have to burn the old house down to do it. Did Irene's journey remind you of your own strength? Subscribe now for heartfelt stories of second chances, quiet bravery, and the power of reclaiming your worth at any age. Because it's never too late to become the woman you were always meant to be.